Welcome to Crawlspace. I'm Tim here today with Lance in the Crawlspace studios in Wormtown. Lance, how are you today?
Oh, doing pretty well. The commute in, I don't know if you had some trouble coming in, but it is raining cats and dogs, and the worm is loving it all. He was rolling around out there, but we made it in. We're here.
The worm was actually being a crossing guard at a flooded intersection.
Oh, really?
Where, the way I came in, yeah.
Oh, no kidding. Well, I think one end of him was being the crossing guard, and the other end of him was frolicking, which is what I saw in the route I took.
Well, today's episode, Lance, has I wouldn't say frolicking or crossing guard or anything like that. This episode is with a woman named Sarah Cailean, who has been on television on HLN and CNN's Hell in the Heartland. She is an investigator, a criminal behaviorist, and she's kind of a friend of the program. She was going to come to the American Crime Festival and do a presentation. Of course, the American Crime Festival was this crime festival that we were going to be a part of that didn't happen in November, but she had signed up, and it got canceled. So we decided to circle back and speak with her about her career and talk to her, get to know her a little bit.
Yeah, she's a wonderful person. It would have been really nice to have seen what she brought to the table at the American Crime Fest, and it would have been nice to have a cup of coffee with her out on the boardwalk, watching the sunrise over the Atlantic. But that, like you said, didn't happen, so maybe there'll be another opportunity in the future. But her, among the other people that were potential panelists and guests at the American Crime Fest, we decided, let's give them a platform anyway. So yeah, we're checking her off the list, and it was a pleasure to have her on the show. And Sarah's involvement in Hell in the Heartland was based on the cold case of Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman. And these were two teenagers from Oklahoma who disappeared in December of 1999. And the trailer that the Freemans lived in was burned to the ground. So Sarah and crime author investigator Jax Miller, they led the team as they investigated what happened to these two young women.
It's a great show, and we have a great chat with Sarah, so we hope you enjoy it. But before we play the interview, we got to tell you about a couple of new live shows that are happening with us in 2020, Lance.
I know. We had such a good time with the duo, Patrick and Jillian with a G from True Crime Obsessed. We had such a good time joining them along with Maggie Freeling in Brooklyn. We were at the Bell House, and that live show went so well that they decided to tack a couple more on. And in March, we will be in Boston at Royale, which is a theater that I remember as a kid. It used to be a nightclub or like a dance club. I think that was called Avalon, but now it's Royale, and we'll probably not be dancing, but it's going to prove to be another great event. Can't wait for this.
Oh boy, the old Avalon. I didn't know that. I definitely went there in my my club days when I was maybe like 19 or 20.
Yep, right there in the heart of the theater district. If you know where the Wang Theater is, it's pretty much right across the street.
And we're going to be in Philadelphia on the next night. So we're going to be in Boston on March 20th, 2020, and we're going to be in Philadelphia on Saturday, March 21st, 2020 at Underground Arts. So check it out. You can find links to buy tickets. Find them probably in the show notes here.
Or you could go to www.truecrimeobsessed.com/c-us-live. That's truecrimeobsessed.com/c-us-live.
Okay, so hope you enjoyed this interview with Sarah Cailean, and make sure to follow her on Twitter. She is Cailean Sarah. Thank you very much. Welcome to Crawlspace. We are being joined by Sarah Cailean. Sarah, how are you today?
I'm well. How are you, gentlemen?
Oh, we're doing great. Thank you for hopping on, and we know you have a busy schedule. You are probably, aside from Mike Morford and Cloyd Steiger, the most famous person we've ever had on the show.
Oh my gosh, that's very, very kind of you to put me in that company. I appreciate it. I'm not sure it's deserved, but I will definitely take it. Thank you.
Oh. Anytime, absolutely.
So what is it that you do now? You've got a lot of titles out there that I've seen. What is it that you like to be called, like that you prefer to be called?
Well, gosh, I'm not really sure. I think, what they call me on HLN and on new stuff when I do consultant work is criminal behaviorist,
Yes.
which is right, which is, in reference to what I studied in postgrad. So it's sort of the same world as forensic psychology, but doesn't require that I go and do the practicals and the labs and stuff like that. So it's basically the same type of work and focusing on criminal psychology, but without I'm not trying to pretend that I am a practicing psychologist essentially. So that's what that kind of academic title is. As for what I do day to day, I think criminal investigator or homicide investigator is accurate. I mean, that's what I'm doing. That's what is essentially paying the bills, as much as it's paying the bills. And that's what I tend to be focusing on, even when I'm doing other projects. So even if I'm doing television production, or hopefully writing or podcasting or whatever, at the end of the day, what I'm always working on is trying to solve cold cases.
And now you are a former police officer with like a decade of service. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. So okay. I did have about a decade of police work, both federal and municipal, but primarily municipal. I did the bulk of my time as an officer in a suburban Columbus, Ohio department. And I did work there on patrol, for the most part, third shift. So that kind of middle of the night stuff, the fun stuff of driving fast and yelling at people and going to bar fights and all that good stuff.
Yep. So you met James Renner.
I did not meet James Renner. I know that he's in that. I know he's in that area. We're chatty on Twitter occasionally, but I've not gotten to meet him in person yet. But I did also, in my time with that agency, and a little bit after, did sex crimes investigation and sex crimes task force and online predator task force and stuff like that. So I've gotten to wear a lot of hats. I had a ton of fun as an officer, and now I'm sort of moved, obviously, into the academic and freelance investigation realm.
Okay, now before we get into your TV show that you had on HLN, Hell in the Heartland, I wanted to talk a little bit about your service with, or your contribution to the American Investigative Society of Cold Cases. You're a member of ASOC, is that correct?
I am now. I'm sort of a brand new member. So I haven't gotten to jump in on any of the big fun with that yet. I attended the conference in April, and just as an attendee, I just sort of paid the public ticket price and went and really, really enjoyed the presentations. I felt like I learned a lot, and I met some fantastic people there. I saw you guys. That was I think a really important discussion about how true crime or true crime media is driving some very real aspects of case solution. And then after the conference, I was invited to join as a consulting committee member. So I'm excited to get to start work on that in a more in-depth way.
Very cool. Yeah. Wow. And now every conference goer was surveyed on their way out and said that unanimously our panel with Mike Morford and John Lorden was by far the best.
I would not. I would not dispute that. I think I went back through the line several times so I could answer the survey question more than once.
Oh, okay. So maybe you swung it incorrectly then. Well, thank you. We appreciate that.
Maybe there was a little.
Just kidding. I'm skewing statistics
stuffing
for you.
Of the ballot box.
No, I'm just kidding. No, it was a great panel. It was a great panel, and I think it's important that was presented for professionals, for law enforcement people who are actively working on cases right now, because as you guys discussed, there is a tendency in law enforcement kind of approach things with this need to know basis. And that happens with outsiders. It even happens within an agency. A lot of times you'll see where things are kind of partitioned off, or they're compartmentalized. And I understand the intention to protect sources or protect an investigation and keep it pure, but I think that it in some ways it does a disservice to actually solving cases to have it too compartmentalized. And when you guys get people to pay attention and say these podcasts, or when journalists or when citizens reach out to you and want to participate, that's not a bad thing. And it can actually be very, very helpful to an investigation. And so I think to have a room full of a couple hundred cops hear that and see it, see where it has actually worked is significant. I really think it's good that you're there doing that.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I think it also was to our benefit that we had John Lorden up there, who was so articulate and well dressed. So it really
he was in like a 3-piece suit, I think. Yeah,
he wasn't, but I mean, we can just assume that. I mean, he could be at any moment.
That's right, with monocle, top hat, the whole nine.
Yeah, absolutely, and.
Yeah, we know he's wearing a snappy jacket at all times. That's one.
At all times.
Yeah, that's confirmed.
That is not a cold case.
Absolutely.
That is a confirmed
That is no mystery. Yeah.
No, It's done. It's done. We'll wrap that one up.
Well, that's all the time we have for today.
Yeah, well, that's good. I'm happy to talk about it.
But no, you do. Tim brought up all of your titles, and you do have a incredibly extensive biography. I don't know how you fit it into one paragraph when someone asks you, send a little blurb on yourself. But how did you?
I don't either, to be honest. And sometimes I feel like it feels a little silly, and I do feel a little tooting my own horn. But I also think, I want to be able to say, hey, these are the things I bring to the table. If I'm being, if I'm part of a conversation, I want to be able to say I can be helpful, not even, for the benefit of myself or looking a certain way, but just so that I can say, if there's a way that I can be useful here are the, the different experiences I've had that might, that might translate into usefulness in cases or in, publicizing missing persons, stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. How did you end up going from the career in law enforcement to being in front of the camera?
It's been this sort of circuitous route. I started life as a very young child, actually, in a professional children's theater company, and grew up in professional theater. I went to I live in Philadelphia now. I originally came here to Philadelphia to go to the University of the Arts, the BFA acting program. So I actually kind of started life with the idea that I would be in front of the camera. But I always, from the time I was a very little kid, have been fascinated by police work, by investigations. And I grew up in Gainesville, Florida, where the University of Florida is. And I grew up in Gainesville in the 80s and 90s. And so between the Bundy case and Bundy cases, obviously, but Bundy's imprisonment was right around the corner from my hometown. And he was kind of the boogeyman of my childhood. I mean, we all talked about him at summer camp. Everybody talked about it at school all the time. There was this very real fear about Bundy in my hometown and in my childhood because, we all knew he had escaped before. We knew that he targeted college towns. And those of us who were, elementary and middle school kids knew that he had moved on to, in Kimberly Leach's case, that he was killing children, not just adults. And so he was this very real kind of haunting figure over my childhood. And then, a year and a half after Bundy's execution, which, it was, 20 minutes from my house, it was this huge deal. We had the Danny Rowling case, the Gainesville student murders. And it was, I think just in my formative years, I had these two bookended, extremely well-known, extremely vicious serial predators. And I think it just made me really curious to know how people like that are made, how they operate in the world. And so even though I thought I was on this path of going into theater or acting, I was always kind of had this side fascination with serial predation. And so at one point in my mid-20s, I just decided that what I really wanted to do was be a homicide investigator. And so I kind of packed everything in and got myself accepted to a federal police academy and started there. And gosh, that was 1998. Or 99, I guess, when I first started attending classes. And when I was in the academy, I was only there a few days before I realized, I had no money and it was in the middle of nowhere in rural Ohio and I was bored a lot. So I decided to do a little light reading and picked up John Douglas's Mindhunter, which at that point was only a couple of years old. And I don't think I was 2 or 3 chapters in before I realized that this was what I was put on the earth to do, was to find this particular breed of criminal. So I spent the rest of my time in law enforcement, always with the singular goal that that's what I would ultimately do, that I would, earn my stripes, as it were, in traditional police work, and then eventually move on into the academic realm of studying serial killers. And so that's what I did.
That's amazing.
I'm a little confused because
back in front of the camera.
No, because you said Ted Bundy was like a boogeyman, but all we've heard is that he's like incredibly charming and he was such a handsome guy.
Yeah. It's funny, as somebody who was sort of genuinely afraid of him, and however real the need for that fear was or wasn't, it was very real to us as kids in that area at the time. And I'm not sure charming was anything I ever thought of him when I saw him in the news and in the papers. And, he's certainly not my type. I'm, more an Adam Levine kind of girl. I'm not really digging the unibrow and dead eyes, but I guess to each their own. No, I mean, all kidding aside, I think that is that's very frustrating for people who spend a lot of time around victims or studying real crime scenes. It's quite frankly, it's disgusting. I know you guys don't mean this, but we do see a lot of it. And these people in social media who their handles are talking about Bundy lover and stuff. I mean, it's gross. And I think that as true crime as a genre is becoming more elevated and it's becoming much more intelligent in the last few years and more exciting to people who really want detail and nuance to their storytelling, I think we're seeing more of an appetite for recognizing these people as what they were, as the monsters that they are, and not just characters in some sort of horror movie.
Yeah. Now, would you say that the intelligence level of the true crime podcasting coincided with the Crawlspace podcast being released?
Well, I mean, that's the only conclusion that one can draw, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. 100%. I am expecting a kickback from this, guys. Honestly, I have really blown a lot of smoke in the last 15 minutes. So, yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Checks in the mail.
So we're talking about Ted Bundy, and we have a mutual friend who's working on a docu-series about Ted Bundy. And of course, that's Celine Beth Calderon, and her docu-series is called Theodore.
Yep.
And how did you come to know her and work with her?
Well, so like the rest of the world, I was first introduced to Celine Beth just listening to an episode of My Favorite Murder. And in there was an episode where she got called up onto the stage to talk to Georgia and Karen about the project. And I remember hearing that and just stopping dead and thinking, I cannot wait for this. This sounds like the first really honest discussion of Bundy and of the victims. So I was excited about that from the time I first heard it, a couple of years ago now. And then this spring, sort of some mutual contacts introduced us via Twitter. And then she and I started chatting a little bit on Twitter. and decided that we really share a passion for telling these stories from the perspective of victims, or from the perspective of serving the victims and serving the officers who are involved. And so at that time, I had just landed on the case that I'm currently investigating, and that is also going to be turned into a doc series. And I asked if she was interested in jumping on board that, and that was April, I believe, that we decided we both wanted to work together on that project. And last week we signed a production deal. So
amazing.
Yeah, we're really excited. We also, Celine and I just had a fantastic girls weekend together in DC at Death Becomes Us. So we have become close friends, and I think we're going to be good working partners too. And I'm looking forward to producing this series with her and with Arc Media, who's going to be taking the helm.
That's awesome.
Okay, so yeah, this is great. So a lot of stuff coming together.
Yeah.
So so just to keep things straight real quick, Celine's got her docuseries called Theodore, and you were on a show on HLN called Hell in the Heartland.
Correct.
And then you're also working on another series with Celine, which you mentioned you just signed a deal.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
Hell in the Heartland.
It is a lot going on. I'm trying to keep it all straight myself. Hell in the Heartland aired this past June on HLN, and that was the culmination of about a 3-year investigation that I worked on with a writer on the case of Laura and Ashley, Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman, 2 missing teenagers out of rural Oklahoma. And that was a 4-part series that CNN picked up, but was distributed on HLN. This one is it's completely different, set of people. It's a different case, so that there's no, confusion drawing the line there. And we're hoping it's going to be a 6-part series. And right now the working title is Amanda's Mom. And it's called Amanda's Mom because it's largely going to be a discussion about the case, and also an investigation of the case of a woman named Renee Bergeron, but sort of told through the eyes of her adult daughter. The case is 26 years old tomorrow, actually. Renee was murdered 26 years ago, and her now adult daughter, who was 10 at the time, kind of helps us sort through the story and sort through the victim's life and everything like that, as we're also kind of actively working the case.
Jeez. How do you find these cases?
There are some benefits to being ex-law enforcement, and this case in particular, I have a good working relationship with the Mobile County Sheriff's Office. And I was looking for a cold case to maybe produce a documentary on, and was kind of rummaging through some of Mobile County's cold cases, and I came across this one. And the first thing I did was I took home some of the information on the case and did a little digging to try and find any family members, because I wouldn't really even consider doing something like this without the family's blessing.
Right.
And I reached out. I've sort of figured out who her daughter was, and reached out to her via Facebook. And I sort of sent this whole long message, and I said, I'm working with this production company. They're Emmy award winning, Peabody award winning. We really want to actually investigate the case and reopen it. And, I kind of send this whole long bio, and I see the 3 little dots kind of coming up, as the person is reading and typing or whatever. And she just responded, "I've been waiting my whole life for this."
Oh, that's awesome.
And and so I kind of felt from that moment on that it almost didn't matter to me if it even ever got picked up as a series, but that I was going to be working on this case at least until all avenues were exhausted. So, I'm really excited that the production company did agree that it's a fascinating case and that it's a story that deserves to be told. For this victim, for Renee, but also for countless other victims, and maybe even will help serve some investigative procedures going forward on how best to handle certain types of cases that maybe even with the best of intentions, cases aren't always handled the way that they should be. And so I think we're going to try and really tell the story of this victim, but also talk about some prejudices that we all have in society, and find ways to help investigators work around those, for the to come with the best conclusions.
What sort of prejudices are you speaking of?
Well, in this case in particular, the victim was a sex worker, um, but it and I hate, there is a sort of an assumption that anytime a sex worker case isn't closed, that, oh, the cops just didn't care because he was a sex worker. And I think it's actually much more nuanced than that, because as I've been working with Mobile County on this case, it's very clear to me that for 10 solid years they worked this case really, really hard. But there are internal biases that we all kind of carry, maybe even without knowing it. And that those have a ripple effect in the way that we interview witnesses, the way we interview suspects, the ways that we proceed. I mean, the case was largely pursued at the time as a drug deal gone bad. But based on the way the body was found, on the particular level of mutilation of the body, there is no doubt in my mind that this was a sexual homicide and probably the result of a serial predator, and was not a drug deal gone bad. So, pursuing that angle, unfortunately, led to a bunch of dead ends. And then, by the time you get past a certain point, it's hard to go back and start over from scratch. Particularly with a smaller agency who has new cases coming in all the time. So I kind of have the benefit. I mean, I'm up against the brick wall of the fact that it's 26 years old and a lot of people are passed or gone or moved away. But I do get to start over from scratch and dedicate 100% of my attention to it, and hopefully retrace it without looking at it in terms of ranking victims. Do you know what I mean? I think that this sort of ranking of victims is something that we all do, whether we intend to or not. And, the reason that the working title is what it is because I find that, we have all these cases that are very important and deserve attention, like Lacey Peterson and Shanann Watts. And, you always see this framing of this mother was murdered, missing mom. The Jennifer Dulos case is always shown as missing Connecticut mom. And, I was reading through all this, and by this point I had been talking to Amanda for weeks and weeks. And I thought, Renee was a mom too. She wasn't just this one thing. And I think that when we tackle an investigation in terms of thinking about her as a mother, as opposed to thinking about her as a sex worker, everybody, even the people you interview, the witnesses, everybody views it differently and maybe remembers things differently or puts a different level of energy into retracing their own steps. And I just, I want to examine that, the way we discuss these things, the way these cases are investigated.
Do you ever find yourself having some pretty candid conversations with law enforcement, with people who are investigating the case directly, about their behavior and maybe about their judgments of it?
Yeah, well, with this case in particular, I haven't yet spoken with any of the original investigators. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the guy who was on it for the first couple of years is passed away. But the frank discussions that I have had with them on Renee's case, at the agency now, is one where they openly acknowledge that mistakes were made. And, that it was not about malice. Like I said, they really did work this case. They just worked it without some of the benefit of some of the training. I mean, in 93, when this was, again, John Douglas and Robert Ressler and Ann Burgess had only just put out their work on profiling and whatnot. So they didn't have the benefit of some of the tools that we have now. But they also, the agency acknowledges that there were mistakes made and they want to make those right. And I think that, all agencies are going to make mistakes, but the difference is on how they either have a mea culpa and say, yes, let's fix this, or no, we don't talk about that. And the agencies that say, yes, we want to fix this are the ones that I think ultimately have the best success rate in closing cases, and also, and probably more importantly, have the best relationships with their communities. And, I think this is an example of that. And I'm excited for that. Hell in the Heartland, we kind of had to put a spotlight on some of the shortcomings of the law enforcement in that area, particularly at the time that the girls went missing. And, they kind of refused to participate. They refused to even acknowledge that there were problems. And that, leaves the entire community still not trusting them. Whereas, in this project, I'm excited that we're going to be able to showcase an agency that wants very much to do things right and is working really hard to literally serve and protect their community.
That's great.
Yeah.
What do you think it is about a community like that who denies access to someone like you? Is it pride, or is it a combination of that and just historical behaviors?
So it's definitely the latter. It is the pride and the combination of not only behaviors. I mean, I think if you want, we could do a whole podcast sometime about the structure of sheriff's department in the Western expansion states, and how they, there is a lot of autonomy to agencies, to certain types of agencies, and that even though they have some checks and balances now, they went so long without any real checks and balances that it fostered an atmosphere that was ripe for corruption. And there is an element of that there. And then once they hit a certain point, just this refusal to look backwards at all, to simply say, well, no, we're just going to clear the chalkboard and start over. Well, that's great for you, and it's great for the agents that are currently working there. But unfortunately, everybody who lives there has a memory. And that's why they, if all they remember is that there was deep corruption and nobody actually ever addressed it, they're not going to believe you now. They're not going to trust you now. So that I think it's a really complex web that led to that particular dynamic that we had with the agencies in that case.
Yeah. And can you tell us a little bit more about that case that you covered on Hell in the Heartland of Ashley and Laura?
Well, it is absolutely still open and active, and they are still conducting searches. I will say one of the things that I'm proud of, though the agencies will never say so to us, I did have a Bible family member tell me a couple of months ago that one of the investigators said to her that the show opened up new leads and that they were actively pursuing new leads based on stuff from the show. So as far as I'm concerned, at the end of it, that is really all that matters. I don't care that they didn't like us, as long as there some good came out of it for the families. So I do know that they did a bunch of searches a couple of months ago in some mines in the Pitcher area, which is it's an abandoned town now. It's no longer an actual city, but it was where a couple of the suspects were living at the time of the disappearance, and then also kind of shortly afterwards. So it's still going. And if people have information, if anybody listening to this, you can go to the Find Laura Facebook page or Twitter or Instagram. I mean, they've got all the social media, and there is a ton of information there, and they are also always accepting new information.
I just want to catch people up who aren't familiar with that. What is the case of Ashley and Laura?
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I was on it for so long, and I have listened to enough, podcasts and stuff about it. I guess I sort of assume most people know, but you're right. That's not a fair assumption. So, December 30th of 1999, Laura Bible and Ashley Freeman were having a sleepover at Ashley's house in Welch, Oklahoma, which is a very, very tiny farming town. I mean, it's essentially all just farmland in the far northeast corner of Oklahoma. So they're really they're almost spitting distance from the Missouri and Kansas lines, right there in that corner. And they were having a sleepover for Ashley's birthday. The next morning, about 5 a.m., 911 was called on a fire at Ashley Freeman's house. Once the fire was put out, Ashley's mother and father ultimately, I mean, it took a couple of days to find all the remains, but Ashley's mother and father's remains were found in the fire, and both of them had been shot to death with a single shotgun blast. And the girls have never been found.
Jeez.
Not even a credible sighting, anything like that you were following up on?
No, not really. I mean, over the years, of course, there have been reports of sightings, but nothing has ever turned up. And Laura Bible's mother, on the first day of the investigation, it was mishandled. I mean, it was mishandled in ways I can't even express. The only remains that were found that first day after the fire were the remains of Kathy Freeman, Ashley's mother, and they turned over the scene within a few hours. They turned over the scene to a family member, saying that Kathy's remains were the only ones in the building. And the next morning at dawn, Laura's parents went over there to try and find anything, look for, any clues. And they found the father's remains, Danny's remains, clear as day, right there in the rubble, with boot prints on him. The detectives had been walking all over his body in the fire rubble through the first day of the investigation. And no, no searches were conducted for the girls that night. There were no bolos put out, nothing. They said, we'll do all this tomorrow. And it was actually never done. It was several days later when Laura Bible's mother had them entered into NCIC as missing persons. And, over the years, a whole slew of tips have come in. There were a couple of searches at other people's properties done early on, but essentially it just kind of got dropped and forgotten by everybody except the families. And Laura's mother never stopped pursuing it 100% as an active investigation on her part. And quite frankly, all of the significant work that was done from the very first day to now was done by the families, Laura's mother especially, but also Dwayne Vansel, who was Ashley's uncle. And so between them and some private investigators that they hired, that's all the real investigation that was done on this case until the last few years.
Jesus.
Wow. How often do you continue communicating with the family members?
Oh, I'm in pretty regular communication with the Bible family. I became pretty close with them. And I genuinely consider Lisa Bible, who was Laura's cousin, but was raised as a sister, an older sister, and Lorene, Laura's mother, I consider them close friends. Lorene is sort of like an adopted mom to all of us. And I can't imagine I'll ever not have them in my life.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's nice that you've made that a nice relationship, at least through such horrible circumstances. So the trailer was burnt down. There were 2 bodies found, and there were 2 people missing. To the 2 young girls, obviously. And was that it?
No, I mean, yes, that was it at the time. Over the course of the time that we were investigating it for the show and whatnot, we found a series of unsolved homicides that seem to be linked in some way or another to the same people associated with this case. So not directly, not like these people were then killed because of this case, but who seem to be connected to the same suspects, but also all unsolved and not closed cases. So there are a lot of unsolved cases in that little nook of Oklahoma, and a large number of them were the responsibility of one particular state agent, who, in my opinion, is kind of the bad guy of the entire thing. Not that I think he went in and, murdered anybody, but these cases were his responsibility. And, it seems, I'd swear looking at it that he's got more unsolved homicides than solved.
What do you think that is? Just incompetence, laziness?
Sure. Yeah. And kind of all of the above. But I also think, I have my own theories on his particular unique level of complicity, based on some associations he had with one confidential informant in particular.
Oh my.
And yeah, it's the kind of, like, I don't want to go too much into it in a public way and end up having to defend myself in a libel suit, which I believe I could. I believe the evidence is there, but who needs that kind of headache right now?
Yeah.
So, I have theories that it is a combination of in over his head, and perhaps looked the other way at the wrong time, which then fostered something that led to all this.
Is this person still in a position of authority?
No.
Okay.
No, but only because he's retired, not because anybody removed him.
Oh my God. What about the suspect or suspects? Are they still out there?
So there was an arrest in April of 2017. No, I'm sorry, April of 2018. There was an arrest of one man, and in his arrest indictment, there were actually two other guys named. Both of those two others are deceased. So they kind of have attributed the entire thing to these three men, but they're actually charging the one man, Ronnie Busick, they're charging him with 4 homicides, Danny and Kathy Freeman. And then they also have charged him with the murders of Laura and Ashley. Although I think obviously they've set themselves up for a difficult time because there are no remains for Laura and Ashley yet. I also, while I personally, as an investigator, believe he was probably involved and had some role in the whole thing, I do not believe that he is, kind of the mastermind or by any means the only one who is alive and should be in custody. Does that make sense without saying too much?
No, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
I was going to ask, was his, did this all come to him because of anything new that you personally had investigated?
Well, again, I would say that Ronnie's arrest was it, the basis of what led to his arrest was work done by Lorraine Bible, by Laura's mom, and Lisa Bible, Broderick, her niece. Their investigative stuff and the tips that came into them were ultimately what led to Busick's arrest. I do think that the one thing that the show did, we were going down there for a couple of years, and each time we went down, sort of our presence was a little larger and larger in terms of the number of cameras and obviously the scope of what we were doing. And I do think that probably our presence helped light a fire under some of the investigators who were kind of not moving really quickly at the time. I really believe that it's Lorraine's work that ultimately got them what they needed, but I think there's certainly some benefit to an enormous national spotlight in terms of getting people to move on something. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
Now, what's one of like your your dream profiles, whether it's living or deceased, as an investigator? If you had the chance to profile someone out
there, you mean
who would that be?
To study somebody?
Yeah.
Gosh, that's a good question. I wish you'd emailed it to me so I'd have a better prepared answer. No. No, I'm just kidding. I might say Danny Rowling, only because it was he was such an important impact on my life as a kid and as, a person in my hometown who our whole city was just profoundly affected by his actions. And I do think it's pretty curious that he committed some homicides and some attempted homicides, but nothing on the scale of what happened when he got to Gainesville. And so I'm certainly of the mind that there's something in that in between time that I would probably like to know more about. I also I have some fascination and just a very, very loose personal connection to Matthew Hoffman, who was the guy in Ohio who murdered a woman, her friend, the woman's son, and the dog, but abducted the little girl who lived there and then held her at his house for a week in a home that was filled entirely with leaves. Like the walls were lined with leaves, and he made a leaf bed and he made leaf pillows. And there is some incredibly interesting psychology going on there. And oh yeah, you've not heard this case. This is not that long ago. This is like 2009 or 2010 in Apple Valley and Mount Vernon area of Ohio, which is just about an hour north of Columbus. Yeah, this guy was bonkers, and that's an official diagnosis, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say that sounded official.
Absolutely, that is in the DSM-5. We now use bonkers in terms of psychopathy. No, I think there's a lot more to him, and I'm hoping to do some work on studying him and maybe get some of his case stuff, because he's got a very minor background. Like he has some arson and stuff like that, and then he just butchered 3 people and held another little girl in a house lined with leaves. I mean, I'm not kidding you. You can find pictures of it online. The walls were covered in bags of leaves, and the basement was filled like almost knee deep in leaves. And that's where he held the girl before she was rescued by police. So
what's this person's name again?
Matthew Hoffman, Hoffman.
That's crazy.
Yeah, he's bananas.
And where is he now?
He's in prison in Ohio. He's in
Ohio still.
Yeah. And that's one, that's a case that I really want to dive into, because that's another one where, the prosecutors charged the case and sort of went after him as a burglary gone wrong. This whole thing of like such and such gone wrong is, I mean, it absolutely happens, but that is not what happened here. This guy was laying in wait in that house for hours before anybody came in, and when he killed them. And I'm of the mind that he was targeting the little girl. She was the goal the whole time. And this idea that like he just happened to wait around in the house for people before they came home, and then he butchered them, chopped them up into pieces, and then hid the bags of body parts in a dead tree in a nearby park. He's got some real tree stuff going on, and I'd really like to, and he's alive. I mean, Rolling is dead. There's not, going to be a chance to interview him, but I wouldn't mind sitting down with Hoffman for a little while.
What are the odds that that'll happen?
Well, he is also a subject of a series of case studies, a book I'm doing on sort of a series of case studies to help kind of support my master's thesis. And so I'd like to say that the chances are good. I mean, I guess it totally depends on if he's willing to do it and if his lawyers are willing to let him do it. But it would just be for purely, kind of academic purposes. So I don't know. I mean, everybody cross your fingers for me that I get to spend some time interviewing Matthew Hoffman and find out what makes him tick.
Fingers crossed.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Fingers are crossed, and we're gonna say that you've, I guess, unofficially confirmed that once you do this interview, you'll come on our show first before anyone else.
Well, yeah, you've heard it.
We basically confirmed that.
Yeah. I think so. Well, and I think, you know what? I think that's only fair because even though I've got this book that I'm working on and there are a whole slew of case studies, I think until you asked that question, it's sort of like, the whole thing where if you can't decide between two things, flip the coin. And no matter what the coin tells you, you'll know what your actual first choice was, right? Because if you say tacos or lasagna, heads or tails, and it lands on tails, and you're like, oh, I wish it was heads, then you wanted tacos to begin with, right? So had you not asked that question, maybe I wouldn't have realized that Hoffman is the one I really want to sit down with. So there you go. Yes, you deserve the first interview.
All right, you owe it all to us.
I do. Yes, I owe everything to Crawlspace. Yeah. Thank you, gentlemen.
I'm pretty sure Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about the influence that Crawlspace has on people mentally.
I'm pretty sure that's what that was. Yeah, I was just at his most recent book came up at a discussion group I'm in a few weeks ago, and I can't believe nobody said Tim and Lance were the real impetus for this. I guess I'll have to bring it back up with my group.
Yeah, that's peculiar.
Well, we try to lay low.
Yes, well, modesty is important.
Yes, and modesty is drenched throughout this interview here today, Sarah.
Clearly, on all sides, Toot toot.